Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 to 23. Not every one that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name, and in thy name have cast out devils, and in thy name have done many wonderful works? And then will I profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity. So that's a very scary thing to hear. Um, and the reason why so many people are going to be told, I never knew you, is because they don't know him. They did not have a relationship with the Messiah. And this is something you'll hear a lot of times from people. You'll tell them about the commandments and they'll be like, oh, well, as long as you have a relationship, like, where's your relationship? And then here's what it means to have a relationship with the Messiah. So First John chapter 2, verse 3 and 4. And hereby we do know that we know him, if we keep his commandments. He that saith, I know him, and keepeth not his commandments, is a liar, and the truth is not in him. So knowing him means keeping his commandments. Here's another one I'd like to show. Titus chapter 1, verse 16. They profess that they know God, but in works they deny him, being abominable and disobedient, and unto every good work reprobate. You'll see again, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not the things that I say? So, what a lot of people do is they fall for this idea that you're saved by faith alone. As long as you say the name Jesus, you're saved, and you don't have to worry too much about whether you keep the Sabbath or not. That's just Old Testament law anyway. And that's exactly why so many people are going to be told, depart from me. So, starting just with like the Sabbath day, first of all, that's the one commandment that everyone in the church ignores. But that's honestly one of the most important ones. And of course, that's why Satan deceived us into not keeping it. Because it says in Exodus 31 here that the Sabbath day, verse 16, wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations for a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. So the Sabbath, that's the sign of the covenant, the everlasting covenant between God and his people. And if you do not have that, you are not in covenant with God. So you don't know him if you are not keeping that. And that's honestly one of the biggest reasons that people are going to be told, depart from me. Another is they're not keeping the Ten Commandments in this way, that they're doing idolatry. And there's obviously the more obvious case of Catholics doing like the statues of Mary and Jesus. And that's obviously something that's not right in God's eyes. That's an abomination. But then there's also the things that everyone else in the church will do too, which is they're doing the holidays, Christmas, Easter, Halloween, even Valentine's Day that just passed, New Year's. All these things have pagan origins, and because they do, they were festivals for other gods. So when you do them, you are breaking the Ten Commandments. You are serving other gods with these holidays. So if you're doing either of those two things, you're not keeping the Sabbath day, or you're breaking the first two commandments with idolatry or serving other gods with those pagan festivals, then you do not have a relationship with the Messiah, and you will be told, depart from me, I never knew you. So it's very important that you keep his Ten Commandments, because that's what it means to be in covenant with God. And people will think that, oh, those commandments, it's not talking about the Ten Commandments. Well, no, it definitely is. You can see in Matthew 19, he tells you, keep the Ten Commandments to enter into life. He doesn't specifically say the 10, but the rich young ruler asks him which one, and he starts specifying the Ten Commandments. So you can't just cross out one of them, or really three of them is what the church does at the very least, and act like you're going to be fine. Because faith without works is dead, and you actually need to be obedient and do what your Lord says. Otherwise, you pleading, Lord, Lord means nothing. So you actually have to obey the Spirit of grace, then you'll receive the Spirit of truth. Um, that's how it works. Everyone is giving a little bit of grace according to Titus chapter 2. And then if you obey that grace, you receive the spirit of truth. What's truth? The Messiah, the Word, He is truth. So if you don't have the truth, you're a liar. And well, where do all liars go? They go to the lake of fire. So you can see how it all connects. But it's super important that you start with those 10 commandments. So I'm going to keep going here in Matthew 7. Therefore, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them, I will liken him unto a wise man which built his house upon a rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock. And every one that heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them not shall be likened unto a foolish man which built his house upon the sand. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. So what is this rock? This rock is the Messiah. You'll see in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Let's go to that. So 1 Corinthians 10, moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant, how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did eat the same spiritual meat, and did all drink the same spiritual drink, for the drink of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. Or sorry, I said that part wrong. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. So the rock that they drank from in Exodus 17, the rock at Horeb, that was the Messiah. And what did he give them? He gave them the life-giving waters, the Ten Commandments. That's what Horeb represents. Also John chapter 4, he's going to give you a drink that you'll never have to thirst again if you receive it. And it's really just an idiom for the rock that, or the water that came out of the rock at Horeb, the Ten Commandments. So it's super important you keep those. You can't just ignore some of them. James 2, if you offend in one point, you break them all. So you can't just do 9 of the 10 commandments, say that you do them all, but you do church on Sunday. Well, that's not correct either, because that's not the Sabbath day. The Sabbath is on Saturday. And if you look up 321 AD Constantine law, this is a big part of the reason why the entire church is doing Sunday. The Roman Emperor Constantine was a sun worshiper, and he set the day of rest in his empire to Sunday. And since they had massive influence over Christianity at the time, a lot of them converted because of the persecution, and they started doing Sunday instead of Sabbath day. And eventually, the church changed it so that it was official in their doctrine. I think it was the Council of Laodicea. I could be wrong. It was like 336, I think. But they changed it so that they transferred the solemnity, they call it, and that's obviously a big no-no in the Word of God. There's even prophecy that they'll do that in Daniel 7, verse 25, that the fourth kingdom, Rome, they're going to change times and laws. So it's important you worship in truth, which means keeping the commandments as God actually intended, not doing whatever's right in your own eyes, but doing how he commanded it. Otherwise, you're fulfilling Mark chapter 7 about following commandments, or sorry, following traditions of men instead of the commandments of God, which is making the word of none effect. What's the word? The Messiah. So you're basically throwing away the Messiah, and that's why you're going to be told, depart from me, because you didn't have him. You didn't have a relationship with him. You kept your own traditions instead of the actual commandments. So very important. Keep the Ten Commandments. That's not the only thing you need to worry about. Obviously, once you start getting in covenant in God, you want to obey Matthew 5:19, and then obviously the royal law, the two commandments the Messiah elevated. People use that a lot and say like, oh, we don't have to follow any of the law. We just need to follow those two commandments. Well, those two commandments, if you check what they are in the law, the first one, loving God with all your heart, soul, and mind, that means to keep all his commandments and learn the word, study it, do it. And then loving your neighbor as yourself, that's quoting Leviticus 19. That means to go and teach other people or rebuke them when they sin, teach them the commandments. And that's what the Messiah said in Matthew 5. If you want to be great in the kingdom, do and teach these commandments. If you want to be least, break them and teach others against, or teach against them to others. So that's really what the two most important commandments are. Keep all God's commandments that he wants you to do and teach others to do so. So it's not an excuse to get out of it. You actually have to keep all 10 and then, go teach other people to do the same. And there's also like the dietary commandments. I'm not telling you to keep the entire law. You don't need to get circumcised. You don't need to go stone people or sacrifice animals. The Messiah ended that. That's called sacrificial law. That was added as a punishment for a temporary time because Israel, they decided to transgress with the golden calf. So unfortunately, they were given those bad statutes for a while. Check Ezekiel 20 on that. But you don't have to keep all that, but you do have to keep the Ten Commandments and the covenant given with Noah to eat clean, which is it's those two are called the covenants of promise. They're mentioned in Ephesians chapter 2. You're grafted into the commonwealth of Israel as a believer in the Messiah, so that means that those covenants are for you as well. So it's important that you don't break any of these. Let's go to Isaiah 66, I guess. This is important. It reinforces the dietary laws because people like to kind of like separate those away from the Ten Commandments, which they are different, but it's still important you keep them as well for this reason. For behold, the Lord will come with fire, and with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger with fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. For by fire and by his sword will the Lord plead with all flesh, and the slain of the Lord shall be many. They that sanctify themselves and purify themselves in the gardens, behind one tree in the midst, eating swine's flesh, and the abomination and the mouse shall be consumed together, saith the Lord. So this is end days prophecy. God's going to come and slay. He's going to plead with all flesh, not just Jews, okay? He's going to plead with all flesh, and he's going to slay those that are eating swine's flesh, the abomination, the mouse. So basically unclean things he told us not to eat in Leviticus 11. Um, and then if you keep going with the chapter, it starts talking about like the second Exodus. That's another thing. People think they're getting pre-trib raptured. That's not true. The pre-trib rapture idea, it's basically invented like not even that long ago. No one ever even believed it for like until 200 years ago. But more importantly, you're going into the second Exodus if you are, well, that's where a lot of people are going. They're going into the second Exodus. They're not getting pre-trib raptured. Um, that's something they don't know because they don't know anything about like the lost 10 tribes, who Israel is, the distinction between Jews and Israel. They think Jews are all 12 tribes of Israel. That's not true. There are 12 tribes, Judah, Benjamin, and some of Levi. That's what the Jews are. They were the southern kingdom, and the northern kingdom was scattered into the entire world, which is why in Isaiah, well, 66 right here, it says that he's going to take them and bring them back. And there's a good chance you have some of that DNA in you, and he's going to bring you back. But regardless of whether you have that in you, if you are a believer, you were grafted in. A really important chapter is Isaiah 56. It says, if you keep the covenant and God's Sabbaths, then if you keep those things, then you will be grafted in, and even you will he bring to his holy mountain, which means he's going to take you back in the second Exodus, and then you'll be able to, praise God in Jerusalem. So you keep going with this chapter and you see later in Isaiah 66, the last two verses, and it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another and from one Sabbath to another shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith the Lord. And they shall go forth and look upon the carcasses of the men that have transgressed against me. For their worms shall not die, neither shall their fire be quenched, and they shall be an abhorring unto all flesh. So super important that you keep the Sabbath day because that's what all flesh is going to be doing in the kingdom. Again, not just Jews, but all flesh. So it specifies that so you can't twist it. So they're going to be worshiping from Sabbath to Sabbath. So they're going to be keeping a literal day. It's not Jesus is my Sabbath. It's keep the actual day as it's commanded in the Bible and the scriptures. So those are two things you need to do. And then I guess the last one that I haven't really spoken much about, don't do the holidays like Christmas and Easter. It says specifically, Deuteronomy, let's find it here. So Deuteronomy 12. There's a few verses I like to point to the beginning and the end of this chapter. So starting in verse 2, ye shall utterly destroy all the places wherein the nations which ye shall possess serve their gods, upon the high mountains and upon the hills and under every green tree. And you shall overthrow their altars and break their pillars and burn their groves with fire. And you shall hew down the graven images of their gods and destroy the names of them out of that place. So knowing that these are heathen customs and rituals, you definitely do not want to be someone who is trying to use those in your worship for God, because he very clearly says to utterly destroy that stuff. And the Christians decided to use them and place it all over, their churches and all over, their places of worship. So that's very unfortunate, but that's why a lot of them are going to be destroyed. And it says later in the chapter, take heed to yourself that you be not snared by following them after that they be destroyed from before thee, and that thou inquire not after their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? Even so will I do likewise. You shall not do so unto the Lord your God, for every abomination to the Lord which he hateth have they done unto their gods, for even their sons and their daughters they have burnt in the fire to their gods. What things soever I command you, observe to do it. You shall not add thereto, nor diminish from it. So very important that you don't do these things because it specifically says, do not ask how they serve their gods and do likewise. And that's exactly what they're doing. Christmas, you're doing the exact same thing that the pagans in Rome did to worship their gods in the festival of like Saturnalia. So he sees this in his eyes, it's an abomination because you're basically just repeating the same exact thing they were doing for their gods. Like, think of it not like, oh, he knows my heart. And yeah, he does know your heart. And if your heart is deciding to do things that he hates, then he knows that it's going to be wicked. So once you know the truth of these things, you have to repent and stop from it. Otherwise, you're going to be told, depart from me, I never knew you. So it's really important. Don't break the Ten Commandments. Get in covenant with God. Keep that Sabbath day. No work on Saturday, Saturday dawn to Sunday dawn. Don't get confused with the Friday evening Jewish tradition of it either. But these are the things you need to do to be saved and not be, told depart from me. So it's super important. Keep his commandments, do the will of the Father. Don't just believe and think that that's all you have to do. Because just because if you call on him saying, Lord, Lord, that doesn't mean that you're saved. So do his will.